welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I realized as we were preparing for Fine Choices 2024 that we've never had a conversation that we've been able to share about the work in this particular exhibition. We haven't been doing this show for 57 years, which is the tenure of the gallery, but probably for at least 30. And what we try to do is to assemble a single work by each of the artists that the gallery has shown or continues to show. In a way, it's a kind of opportunity to look back. It's a diary of relationships and friendships. And it gives, at least for me, an opportunity to just express gratitude. One of the most extraordinary experiences of the gallery is that it's still here. Very few galleries that I know of on Newbury Street or elsewhere have lasted for more than half a century. And it's due to so many people, both the artists, the patrons, the people in the community who have embraced the opportunity and the willingness to open themselves up to a range of experiences, ideas, and art itself. One other side note, which was until 1982-83, and we were founded in 67. Ceramics were not part of the gallery at all. And then by chance, we met Brother Thomas Bezanson. And today, in our present space, of the 7,000 objects that are here, 3,000 of them are works in ceramics. Hence the idea that life does go on, and hopefully it continues to evolve and grow with an inner sense of direction that has meaning. I'm just totally thrilled that Rusty, Sam Bach, and Mara, along with Caroline, are here just simply to chat with you about what is called Fine Choices 2024. So let's begin. And we begin with, appropriately, the birthday boy almost, Sam Bach's painting.
So Bernie,
Yes, sir.
Before we start, I wanted to say just a minute, just say a couple of words about Fine Choices. The gallery has been open for 57 years, as you noted, and Fine Choices is a selection of the works that are here. But I think I would like to acknowledge the fact that the Fine Choices available in Pucker Gallery are curated by you over those 57 years. You've gone through any number of artists, chose those that you respond to, and interestingly enough, I seem to respond to almost all of them as well. So I'd like to thank you and congratulate you, because the Fine Choices that are here are selections that you've made. So I'm grateful that I can be a part of this, and grateful to you for all that you've done to create this.
You're more than welcome. Thomas has that wonderful quote that there are two signs of a great soul. One is generosity and the other is gratitude. And I think if those two G's guide us in our conversation, we'll be in good shape. Right. So Caroline, if we can look at Sam's ready, and Sam, hope that you're ready.
I am ready. I am ready. It's a great pleasure for me to be part of this event. It's a gift that it starts with a painting of mine, and a painting of mine that I was famous for years as the painter of pears. So it is part of me. And right now I'm painting another series of pears, as if I did not paint enough. So I think whoever looks at this pear wouldn't like to be in its place. The pear is kind of protected, but totally imprisoned. I try to make it a kind of a mythic object. I took from Bruegel the universal landscape, which means the entire world. And I took the pear that for me is somehow a symbol of life, of the mystery of life, of what we really cannot know, although very often it is also the symbol of knowledge, because it might have been one of the fruits presented by Eve to Adam. So here we go. The fruit is very much in a kind of bricolage of protected and imprisoning things. which for me, when I look at it and when I painted it, was also the idea of the world in which we live, of democracy, which is so fragile and must be protected, and democracy that sometimes allows extremely dangerous forces come to the surface, and there needs to be aware of it. So somehow I think that this is what belongs to this painting, what I can say about it.
Mara, I'd love for your perspective on ready.
Well, I was actually just thinking, what is this pair or the symbol ready for? Are we ready to do battle? So we've girded ourselves with these sort of metal armor plaques and buckles. Are we carrying a standard with us? Are we ready to face life in general? So the counterpoint of being ready is very interesting to me. But the piece itself, the figure with the universal background, so any martyred figure, constrained figure, are the soft cloths a wrapping? Is it the shroud? So it's what I love most about this painting is it has so many metaphors that you can conjure based on the painting, based on the surfaces that Sam's created, on the textures, on the topics. And you could have pardon the pun, a fruitful conversation with all of us participating to come up with a meaning today for this work. And then 15 months from now, if we came back to it, we could have another fruitful conversation, and we may come up with more meaning, deeper layers of meaning. And when somebody says, well, beauty's in the eyes of the beholder, I would say, well, there are richer and deeper viewing experiences that you can have every time you come back to a work of art. And what tends to be, given the term masterpiece, or are works that you can come back to over centuries with the human spirit of different times, from people from different backgrounds, and have a rich, in-depth aesthetic experience where your heart and your mind and your spirit are working together. It's kind of embarrassing to say this right in front of the artist. I would put it to you, this is one of the masterpieces that is going to go through time and stand up very, very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
What a beautiful way to help me to move on to the next image at the same time, although I want to hear Rusty's thoughts. So Rusty, why don't you speak, and then I'll talk about that notion that you just talked about, masterpieces and things that people can come back to over and over again. So let's go back to the ready, if we can, Caroline, and then Rusty, because you've been involved with either pairs or giving birth to pairs for a very long time.
I had one of Sam's iconic paintings of pairs giving birth to pairs, giving birth to pairs, which I had in my infertility office for many, many years, and it was a wonderful symbol of that. This is a fascinating pair, and I'm sort of, combining what Sam and Mara have said. Here is an object that can be thought of, as Sam mentioned, as fruit, as fertility, or as knowledge. Something of value, however, something that's not just a toss away. And now look at it, it's all bound up. It's got a teacup around it, which is part of or a tea, who knows exactly, but it looks like a teacup kind of thing. So it's part of our culture, is wrapped around this. And so as you look at it, and that's the universality that Mara's referring to, what are these things? And they will change, but the universality is they're human problems and human endeavors that get wrapped around. And once you do that, is this a protected object and therefore ready as best it can? And that's one of the things that's fabulous about the concept of ready. I mean, it's like, okay, I've got COVID and I've recovered a little bit and I want to go out and get my mail, as Sam said. Am I ready? And you're sort of trying to piece yourself together and be ready. But the other thing that came to me, and as Sam talked about this, maybe this concept of democracy being fragile and being pieced together, is that in order to protect it, you have to restrict it. And so there is in this element a sense of, yeah, you might be ready, but you can't do anything. So the rule of law might come into this, or other kinds of things where you say, yes, democracy is a wonderful thing, but it has to have structure or it will be destroyed. So I can't agree more, Mara. This is a fabulous, fabulous piece, Sam. Congratulations.
Thank you much. Now we can go to the next piece. The segue for me was that many years ago, there was a conversation between Sam and Brother Thomas, and this piece is by Brother Thomas, each of them expecting the work of the other to be available to civilization 1,000 years from now. Brother Thomas feeling strongly that Sam's paintings are fundamentally about art at its best, namely the human condition, and Sam feeling that Thomas's individual pieces are really about the eternal question of beauty and as it affects our lives. So the notion of having these two mainstays, if you will, of the fine choices of our experience of having the gallery, of their wisdom, of their talent and their art, really makes these two pieces juxtaposed, very fine choices. And Caroline, I'd love to ask you to speak a bit about the Brother Thomas.
Well, this piece here, it's what I love about Brother Thomas's work is he's taking simple things in ceramics, like this form and this glaze is a fairly straightforward recipe, and taking that to an elevated level. So it's like for one, this piece is pretty large, especially in porcelain. It's 17 plus inches tall and almost a foot wide, and it just elevates the simple form that mimics the human body, that's timeless. And then he also he doesn't try to make it flamboyant what is on top of it. The Temuku glaze is ancient. It's really a simple recipe, and then he's given it this adornment of the rutile, and it's just simplicity and elegance all together, and it's really quite nice, and it's really quite a lovely piece to be around because it embraces your body at about the same size, and it's really Brother Thomas in a nutshell right here.
I would like to, if I can, just put in my few thoughts about it. First of all, I love and you will see it later, not yet, in the next slide, how it relates to my painting that you saw before, because you just reverse it, and it has the shape of a pear, and is crisscrossed by these seemingly completely abstract shapes that have a beautiful form in themselves. And there is a certain tension, I would say, between the perfection of the vase. It's so perfect, it's so symmetrical, it's incredibly beautiful. And the kind of brush stroke of the crisscross. And yet, maybe this is my imagination. When I look at it, what I see is a number of angels. I see one angel, then the second angel. I see 4 angels. I see 4 angels on the shape. And these are not things intended by him. This is my own Rorschach test. And it is absolutely amazing what Brother Thomas knew to do is work with the fire in a kind of a conspiracy almost of expecting the unexpected.
And then recognizing it and not breaking it.
And
Sam, right, because there was so much of what he did, which is close to 90% of all the pieces he created, close to 22,000 pieces that he broke with a hammer, Being Scottish, however, he gave the shards to the nuns so children could make mosaics of those, and nothing got wasted, and then allowing us to have close to 2,400 pieces. But beyond that, there is, Carolyn, you were speaking as well, it occurred to me a sense of enormous dignity and poise and presence that this piece has. And do we have the slide of the juxtaposition of the two pieces? Or yes. So Sam, and that's for you to discuss a bit. I love it.
I just saw the shape crisscrossed by those angels that I see. I cannot help myself. I see here 4 angels, and it gives me even an idea of taking this photograph and with Procreate just complete the image of the angels. But I'm absolutely amazed how it is exactly the same structure of the composition. It is the pear shape crisscrossed by those various shapes of the metals, stripes, and the rope and the fabric that keep it together.
Wonderful. Rusty, since fertility used to be part of your activity, would you like to talk about the fertility of angels?
Well, sometimes we need to invoke the angels to get where we got, I think. That's about as close as you get. Only thing I would add is that I wanted to reiterate what Caroline has said. This is a beautiful, beautifully shaped vase. But on the other hand, it's not perfect. Look at the right shoulder that dips a little bit relative to the left shoulder, just a tad. But it's so minor that the beauty of it is the dominant aspect. And one of the things that Thomas pointed out to me when we were looking at some of his work years ago is the difficulty in making a porcelain lip as thin as the lip on the top of this object. He said that when you get porcelain that thin and try to get it to bisque dry, it frequently will flop. It will go down one place or another. So he had learned a technique that allowed him to create that. So the potters in the audience probably know this, but imagine if that flopped at all, suddenly you'd lose that incredible, sort of shape. And he was able to do that. So one of many things that Thomas taught himself, I guess, is the best way to say it, and yet incorporated into what he's offered the world.
Mara, did you want to say anything about these two, or one?
Just listening to Sam and Rusty, and in a conversation, even though we have to go like this because we're on Zoom, I'm all of a sudden struck. And so this is the Catholic in me. This is the girl who went to Catholic school. In so many ways, the Virgin Mary, the suffering mother, you've got this woman who gave birth, who, according to the story, knelt at the foot of the cross for her son, who had a crown of thorns. And this woman who then embodied her own son. She gave birth to her son and embodied her son. And there's something about the drapery on the pear and the angels, which drape and have this marvelous sort of life-affirming energy splashed across Brother Thomas's vase that just, I'm intrigued. Set in this universal landscape, the Madonna. It's just yet sort of another layer of thought as I reflect on like my whole history, and then listening to these two people whose history comes into it. Again, the masterpiece, how rich the imagery allows us to go into the piece and go deeper into the piece and deeper into the piece.
What both of you, and in fact everyone so far, and I think people who do come to the gallery experience, is that the art enables you to be the best of who you are. And what you bring to the work enhances both the art, but it also enhances you. And these two pieces juxtaposed on the screen certainly are, I would argue, fine choices. The quote I wanted to use from Thomas, which I think is relevant because we're going to the work of Shoji Hamada, is tradition is a thing of the spirit, not a recycling of the past. And now let's look at Shoji's piece that we have in the show. Sam, would you like to speak just briefly? This is the two sides of one piece.
Yeah, it's for me again, it is the mastery which seems to be so very simple of those two very enigmatic drawings. And each one is absolutely beautiful. For me, it is there is some music in them. There is some music because it has this absolute perfection of tensions, and they propulse themselves further away, and they are part of a beautiful shape. So what can I say? These things leave me with a sense of admiration.
Wonderful. Caroline?
Well, I always think of the previous pieces were getting my brain whirling about where the spirit of an artwork is put in by the artist. And of course, as many people know, the Shoji Hamada would have worked in with many people. He'd have apprentices and he'd have people who would have different tasks. But from my understanding, the drawing on here, which is a variation on a broken rice or sugarcane stalk, I think rice, but a bent over piece of rice stalk. That is what he would have done, probably without a doubt, would have been his drawing. And I think that this piece exemplifies that very well, not only in the contrast of the dark persimmon glaze, which I think he's quoted to have said it's the color of a persimmon on like the 22nd of May or something, kind of, you know, a little flamboyant like that, but contrasting it with that light and dark, I mean, it just stands out. And not only that, the shape is just, it's such an approachable shape. And I love Shoji Hamada always gave kind of a strong lip to a piece. It's just this, the shape of it tickles me. It has that breath too, where it's, you know, it's breathed out. It's not a constrained vase. It's very relaxed in the way.
Thank you. One of the privileges of the gallery is to now be able to find pieces of Shoji Hamada, some in basements. The works may have been purchased by American soldiers after the war and given to their family, and then somehow they find something in the basement and get in touch with it and say, do you think this has any value? Because Hamada was simply making, and he continued to make. My sort of mild estimate is that given the fact that he had 30 full-time apprentices over an extended career of almost 50 years, that there must be at least 200 to 250,000 of his works. And yet each one that we have been able to acquire over the years has a presence, has an integrity, and has an unusual spirit of vitality, most of it because of the decoration. The forms are all very simple, but they have this joy. And in the video that we have of he and Bernard Leach, you just see him decorating one after the other. The final piece I mentioned is that technically these ain't easy to do. And so people need to keep that in mind. To keep the freshness and spontaneity of this resist is incredibly, incredibly difficult. So let's move on to the work of Mark Davis. And Rusty, you've known Mark's work for quite some time, just to sort of respond to this piece, which is recent and done for the show.
Mark's an incredibly energetic individual who I've had the privilege of knowing almost as long as I've known you, Bernie, because he was early in the gallery and he made mobiles originally that hung from above, and they were quite intricate, very delicate, some of them. The line that held the pieces was very thin, very complex. He's obviously very Calder-like, but he has his own voice. And what I've loved about Mark's work over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so is that he now hangs his mobiles on the side of the wall as well as the ceiling if you wanted to. and makes a suspension that actually works as a mobile attached to a sidewall rather than a ceiling. His coloration is incredible. I mean, talk about joy. These these mobiles have so much joy in them and so much fabulous coloration, and it's almost endless. Mark was kind enough to actually do a commission work for my home recently. Came to the house, looked at the garden, looked at the windows and what the view was, looked at what the living room looked like, and then created a work not too dissimilar from this, but with very different coloration and a different feel that so well matched the feeling as you walk into our living room. So he's a remarkable artist, remarkable energy, and remarkable creativity that is, again, most people find the word joy just comes immediately to mind when you encounter one of his pieces. They'll move a little bit, they're colored in a way that just makes you feel good.
Sam, thoughts?
Well, I feel very much at home with these shapes floating like that. It's a beautiful piece. It's a beautiful piece. And it reminds me somehow when such things were at the beginning of their legality. I must say, paintings made out of suspended pieces, which I saw in Paris in '56. So there's an old tradition of doing these things, and many of these things that this Mark Davies took it to a very personal level when we think of the mobiles of Calder. And I must say, just to share with you, the memories just came to me now. I met somebody that I vaguely knew. His name was Chaim Gross. He was an American sculptor. And I was in Paris, and I was very young. And he said, let's have a coffee. And we sat down. And then a gentleman came over. Oh, he said, how are you? And I looked at him, and it was Calder. And I thought, my goodness, here I am so young, and here I am between those two wonderful people that I admired all the time. I will listen to what they have to say. And they were speaking about in which shop to buy some ties and shirts. It just came to my mind right now. Poor Mark, I apologize. I saw these things. Immediately I saw a bird, kind of a bird on maybe a time of Halloween, a very joyful bird. You see the round shape, the eye, you see this kind of leaf, the golden leaf, the beak, and immediately I saw that the whole thing wants to go to the right. So, and there is even a suggestion of a wing when you look at the big shape in. So I'm terribly sorry. I speak of other artists and I speak too much of myself. But you know, this is legal among us. This is always the case.
Yeah, I love it. Sam, let me just share one of the nice comments of Brother Thomas, which I think applies much to Mark's work. And in fact, the book we published was called The Joy of Movement. The difference between the process of art and the process of craft is that in art, the chief characteristic is joy. And I think ultimately Mark has been able to remain connected to this idea that art, as he creates it, needs to create in others a sense of pleasure, a sense of joy, of playfulness, and the movement adds to that, the shadows add to that. And so there's a kind of wonderful opportunity in his work to really participate as a spectator, but feeling because of the movement, you're also part of its movement itself. So that's where I want to move on because we chose a lot of fine choices. So this goes back to the year 1970. The gallery opened in '67, and one of the artists in the first exhibition of the gallery was the work of David Sharir, whose works we had found when we were visiting in '66, '67 through the Safrai Gallery. who were fundamental to, and their trust was fundamental to us even being able to have a gallery to begin to explore the world of art. So let me just acknowledge both Dove and Shoshana, both of whom have now passed, but their relationship to us and their trust in us really made almost everything that we have been able to accomplish happen because of that. So Sam, I'd love for you to respond to this. This is called Angels Over Jaffa.
Yeah, for me, it's a very beautiful painting, but there are some stories and commentary that I can make. First of all, I must say that I met David Charir in 1960. He came to one of my shows in Rome at the Galleria Schneider. And I kind of felt a little guilty of being a too successful artist very young. So when he came, I felt that I have to do something for him. So at a certain point, I evacuated the studio, an old studio in an old building, and I knew that it remained empty. I said, David, come and work here. He was very grateful. So I must say, I know David from so many years. But speaking of this specific painting done in 1970, this was 3 years after the 6 Days War. The 6 Days War was a war in which really a certain miracle happened. The country felt that it was condemned, that it was going to be destroyed, and suddenly it conquered territories, it won, and there was an euphoria, an incredible euphoria, excitement of having survived and having won, and suddenly all kinds of dreams, almost impossible dreams, started to invade almost every mind. I look at this painting and I see in it also an incredible documentary of our times and of what we have experienced. Old Angels over Jaffa. Jaffa is this ancient town that exists since biblical times. And the first Jews that arrived to Palestine around the end of the 19th century, beginning of 20th century, they lived in Jaffa. And about these people, the famous Nobel Prize writer Shai Agnon wrote several novels. But then they found that it was very difficult to live among those old buildings, narrow streets, and so on. And they decided to make a Jewish suburb to Jaffa. And they created Tel Aviv. So Tel Aviv started as a suburb of Jaffa. And when I arrived to Israel, Jaffa was a suburb of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was a city which was mainly purely Bauhaus, besides a few old streets that were still close to Jaffa, and it was a city of the hope of Bauhaus. The Bauhaus had started somehow to fall apart because they were very badly built, these buildings. But coming to the euphoria of the winning of the war, there was a belief that we can create a beautiful restoration of the old Jaffa and make it a kind of a paradise. And I must say, if you look well into how this old Jaffa here is described, there is a balance, there is a rhythm, there is a zigzagging of tensions. It's really extraordinary. And then you go to the angels above, and they look like two pious Jews floating in the sky. Those two pious Jews are, for me, a kind of prophecy. There will be people who, in the name of religion, will destroy whatever you have built. And if you look well, for me, these are the two devils. They are the partners of today's government of Bibi Netanyahu. And they're already in this painting. So this painting has a kind of a documentary, prophetic sense for me personally. No one is forced to look at it in this way. I must say, feel free to make your own dreams.
Mara, let's see where you come from, having gone to Boston College and grown up in Boston.
Well, having grown up in Boston and studied art history, this painting has so many references to different periods of art history in it. You could have Giotto here, you have MC Escher here, so you could go through a whole range of references that go beyond a scene of what an ancient city, an ancient walled city might look like. What I find interesting is the void. This terracotta background, so subtly articulated to give a sort of rich, deep space for otherwise flat surface. And that the city somehow seems to exist in a void with these angels or devils flying above, depending on Sam's interpretation, or a more joyful, joyous his interpretation. But and then it's just, you've got this terracotta, overriding terracotta and the beige, and yet you've got the blue sea or river float, and then this little heart of blue that picks up with the angels of blue. There's just a very subtle layering of colors on the city that is a layered city, and the Middle East is such an ancient place that you can't put a shovel in without coming up with a different civilization on top of a different civilization on top of a different civilization. And somehow all that layering just makes me think of the complexity of trying to untangle things in the Mideast.
So Sue and I lived in Jerusalem 1959-60, when Jerusalem itself was divided, and then, as Sam's referenced, the war in 67, and this painting being painted 3 years after. And David's art represented at that time, for me, a sense of both discipline and design, homage to the Italian primitives, and at the same time, a sense of structure and joy. And he was able, with all the discipline required to do a painting like this, to maintain that sense of joy in the works. And I would say that really went on for another 15 years in the body of work that we represented for him here, and the Safrai Gallery did in Israel. The difficulty is that when you are working out of an internal world where the external world begins to shift and change, it certainly makes it harder to maintain the sense of joy and optimism. And so this painting comes with a sort of sense of bittersweet. The sweet is the memory of those experiences in 59-60 and the relationship to the birth of a nation with a vision that we would be a light unto the nations. And the bitterness comes with what history itself has shown. And so somehow this painting has both the sense of beauty and optimism and the sense of reality and tragedy that Sam referred to. So let's move on to a whole new part of the gallery from my point of view. 6 years ago, I think I got a request from the chief curator of Asian art at the Art Institute of Chicago, Tao Wang, if I would meet with a young Chinese artist named Li Hongwei. And I said, sure, but we already have 17 artists who work in ceramics, and the gallery itself at that time was chock full of pots. I wasn't sure I needed another potter, but in meeting him and now having worked with him for the past 6 years, it was a very fortunate meeting. And I wanted to ask, again, Caroline, to respond, because you were here, I think, during the sort of growth of our relationship with Hongwei's work.
Absolutely. The one thing I'd like to point out here, this is a series of his, of course, this is number 16, An Allegory of Balance. And not only is the piece, of course, physically balanced, and even though asymmetrical, it's visually balanced. These are porcelain pieces with what's known as a crystalline glaze. So they're actual crystals that grow or bloom in the surface due to a very specific firing technique during a cooling process. They are rather random. Hongwei does repurpose, just like Brother Thomas did, a lot of his pieces, because you might fire one of these porcelain pieces and it's not balanced where the crystals are, so he will shatter them, and he repurposes them into a later series that I believe came after this one, probably because he was sitting on a lot of these and wanting to do something new. But these, of course, are paired with all the shiny pieces are stainless steel, very polished, made by hand. There's a spectacular, I won't go into it in detail, but process video of how he makes these. And as you can see on the bottom piece, how he pairs them seamlessly together, which goes with the balance as well. And I think there's some commentary on the balance of old China meets new China, from my understanding, where a lot of people were brought fairly quickly into the present day. And of course, porcelain is historically, I mean, is rooted in China. It was a secret for many years. And of course, stainless steel is the new age, big buildings, and how do those come together? So he's doing that both materially and in his thoughts as well of how he approaches this.
Wonderful. Rusty?
It's been a joy watching Hongwei evolve into these various pieces. He was originally, I believe, Bernie, trained as a sculptor.
Yes.
And these are now sculpted pieces. We'll talk about that more in the photography in a little bit, but he started out throwing traditional forms, mostly with crystalline glazes, and uses glazes that he can oxidize or reduce, change color, etc. But they're actually gorgeous vases and different pieces that are more the traditional, and then began this journey. And we at the gallery have been able to follow that journey. And it's a young man, relatively speaking, evolving in his artistic passion that is, deeply felt and very internal as he does it, but creates these pieces that are marvelous. And so we've gone from something that might be 12 inches tall to something that might be 8 feet tall. And in that process has lost nothing and probably has gained something. As Carolyn said, the concept of melding the old and the new is structurally amazing and remains quite beautiful at the same time.
Let me just share, Thomas is always present for me. As you know, what is old and beautiful is always new, and what is beautiful and new is always old. And I just love the combination both of the 5,000-year-old porcelain in the context of China and the use of stainless steel. And the second element up in this piece is clearly a vase shape. And we do have vases in that shape, and he's integrated it into this extraordinary column of energy and beauty. Can we move on to the next piece, please? Sam, I'd love for you to talk about Jerry's work. Jerry died.
Yes, an artist that I have discovered in your gallery, whose work I always admired. There is an incredible sense of balance in this painting. Joy, I would say, also in terms of the color. And it's, they are very subtle. There are several even styles combined here. On one hand, you have the oranges and even the lemons proposed as a very slowly kind of mellowing three-dimensional optical plasticity, while the shadows are geometric. They are flat, and the whole thing is an abstraction. There is a combination, a large shape of of lemon yellow, a smaller shape of lemon yellow, a third, and a fourth, which is the smallest. So there is a certain musicality that goes from the fortissimo to the pianissimo. All this happens in this painting. I look at it as a painter. I look at it admiring his sense of combination and of cutting shapes by superpositions of one to the other, by modulating the flat, the seemingly flat surfaces, which are even more visual when you see the original than here. But still, I must say, were I a dog, my tail would have destroyed me.
By wagging so much. Love it. Mara?
Well, just picking up on everything that Sam said, there's an extraordinary sense of equipoise and energy. Very simply stated. There's nothing bombastic or boastful about this. There are harmonies and there are counterpoints in the whole piece. So you have the yellow counterpointed with the violet of the background. So you've got right across the color range, but you also have analogous color with the yellows into the orange. It is musical, the whole piece, the energy of the piece. It's deceptively simple, but it's masterful.
All those things are so true. And I must say that when we opened the gallery, Jerry was one of the early painters that we showed from the United States. We had begun by showing works primarily from Israel through the Safrai Gallery. Mm-hmm. And he was also at that time the only artist for many years who consistently said thank you to the gallery for whatever we did on his behalf. And he always phrased it by saying, you know that Lois and I had a gallery, and we know how hard it is to have a gallery. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to have my work seen and shown. What you said, Mara and Sam, too, is that there is a almost purity to every piece that he did. And there's an integrity to the work itself that reflects who the man was. There was a balance in him, an equipoise that was in him, and then these works. And I remember every time we did a show, there was an easily 3 to 6 month period before he could begin again, because these are not still lifes based upon setups of objects. These are paintings created out of nothing. And he always had to come to a blank canvas. And it took him months until he renewed the energy and then did an entire new body of work. So for me, each one of these takes away my breath in a very wonderful way, both through memory and the person that he was. And then the pieces themselves have an elegant beauty and joy embedded in them that I think anyone who looks at any length of time at the paintings senses. So we'll move on to Saul Steinberg, very different world, but also, Sam, he's your man.
Oh, please. My, I mean, Saul Steinberg for me is one of the greatest American artists. I do not think that he is sufficiently appreciated. I think that the fact that he did some illustrations, cartoons, that he was on so many covers of the New Yorkers and so on, has somehow diminished, I would say, the admiration for his art. And although he exhibited in many museums and he did some large works, Steinberg essentially remains the master of the framed size of watercolor or a drawing. With this painting, I would say, is a kind of a very sad and almost tragic portrait of America. It's empty. It's not the America of Boston or the America of New York. It is not even San Francisco, although we see ups and downs here. We see here an incredible loneliness in the figures, and they're afraid. that the ground under their feet may move at any moment. Look how they try to fight for balance. Look at the buildings. You look at a distance, you have something in this kind of almost Renaissance palace, almost St. Peter's. And then you have those on the left side, almost Hollywood-like scenery of what is typical Americana. And on the right, you have an innocent Bauhaus building with people looking in sadness at what happens in the street. In the middle of all that, somebody with a lot of money who bought a very expensive car is trying to impress everybody. And the composition of it, the music that goes, that you can hear almost moving from figure to figure, and the sense of perspective that it has. It is so flat, and yet and the subtle shadows. I mean, I look at this and I'm absolutely speechless. I think for me, he is certainly one of the, he was not American, he was not born in America, and he came to the States already bringing with him exactly his language, but he created portraiture of a portrait of America that I think only maybe Hopper managed, or I don't know who else.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's wonderful just to see the drawing, painting, whatever, through your eyes and to experience it totally anew, even on the screen, separate from being able to walk by it, just the use of the darks and the lights. Mara, just briefly, your thoughts?
For such a stripped down art form, ink with pale color, and the attention to detail is remarkable to me. Look at the curb cut, and you've got the different kinds of storm drains going down, like it just doesn't take much to evoke the whole streetscape. The most elaborate thing in here is, of course, the grill work on this very expensive Bentley-like car coming up and forward and pulsing towards you. You know, it's a city that's grown because you've got the Bauhaus, you've got some, you know, sort of the Beaux-Arts period details in some buildings, and you've got these, you know, big beautiful cornices in other buildings as a city, the broken column monument at the end. It captures this sort of place, you know, in a remarkable way, with very an economy of means, I think is what I need to say, an economy of means, but attention to detail at the same time.
It has been a joy for us over the past probably 15 years to continue to acquire specific drawings of Steinberg. When he died, he left 3,000 drawings to Yale, plus 250 of his rubber stamps. So he already diminished, in a certain sense, the number of works available, and yet many come available, and it's just an opportunity to go through and find those ones that speak to what I would call a fine choice. And then if we're able to acquire it, to add it to the gallery collection, this being one of those pieces. Let's move on to a number of images of a single photograph by Stephen Althaus, who is, I think, the most recent fine choice, meaning that he's the artist that we've added to the gallery most recently. And Rusty, since you were part of the decision-making, I'd love for you to talk a bit about it. And we'll look at the 3 photographs, one of the image, one of it with you in it, so it gives a sense of scale, and then the last of a detail.
So Stefan is probably the newest addition. He's a sculptor, also, I mentioned that before, by training. And after having made a number of pieces, realized he needed to photograph them for a portfolio, and so began photographing, and then got involved in photography as a mechanism for presenting his art. As a result, his feelings and reality being, his images are best presented for the purpose of engaging the public in a monumental size. You see, the size of this photograph is 8 feet long, roughly 5 feet tall. And his explanation, which I had not thought of until he talked about it, is that these are sculptures. And he said, imagine if you had a David that was, 12 inches tall. Would that give you an emotional engagement? And obviously not. So he purposefully goes through a process of photographing. He photographs with large format camera. He'll take multiple photographs so that he gets a depth of field. He then digitalizes the photographs and can merge them computer-wise so that the front wheel and the back wheel are both in focus. And yet it's all done with natural light, and it's all done with a very dark background so that the image that he portrays is a poignant one as you look at it. Stefan has a very deep sense of spirituality about the works that he does. He takes a long time to think about them, to create them, and he has a sense of emotion about what he's going to present. And this particular image called Broken Wagon was created when a number of his family were either sick or actually had passed away. And much of the burden of the family and things that needed to be done was placed onto him. He lives in Pennsylvania in close association with the Amish community. He's not Amish, but he is a very good friend to the Amish community. And this particular wagon was in an Amish barn, and they allowed him to bring it to his home, and he could go through the process of photographing it and creating this image. And next slide will show you just how big an image it is and how it has the effect. But if you get very close to this image, you can go to the third slide, actually. You can see every little piece of grain. He uses cloth, and uses cloth in the way of a shroud for certain pieces. And you can see every little thread because of the way he does his photography. So it's a captivating. When he came in the first time and rolled out these images on the floor of the gallery, you just took your breath away. In addition, he has a sense of mission almost. What should this image? How can I bring this image in the way I felt it? And so he uses scripts and scripture sometime, but it's scripts and other. And he does this as part of the piece itself. And he uses Photoshop to do this. He photoshops every letter. He says it would take him less time if he just actually put it in the wood and then took a picture of it than it does to Photoshop, because each of the letters has to fit in the right place, have the right coloring, look like it's part of the wood. And each piece, each statement is poignant. And this one uses Pennsylvania German. He uses Braille. He uses Latin. He uses some Spanish. And you say, well, it's all in German, I can't read it. And that's part of what he's trying to say, is that you have to reach in, you have to dig in a little bit to get this. And what this particular, people call it Pennsylvania Dutch, it's Deutsch, it's German. It translates into, to carry the heavy load, I was willing and still am willing, but now I am unable. So this Broken Wagon, a beautiful piece of what has been a part of American history and used in a lot of different ways, and you have a bonding with it. Also represents something that in our lives many of us will face at some point. So these pieces are incredible. He does make, we convinced him to make a little bit smaller. He really believes the biggest images are the best images, but there are somewhat smaller sizes that are available. And I actually have this image as a smaller image in my home. Hanging an 8-foot photograph sometimes is difficult, but they are quite amazing and wonderful in the sense that it's not just a representation of something, it's a statement of some sort.
Thank you much. I think that we can move on with that, Rusty, only because I want people to absorb it, but also to acknowledge the fact that, as in the past, we're going to run over an hour. So let's move to a second living national treasure of Japan, Tatsuzo Shimaoka, who played an enormously positive role in the gallery's history. First, when Thomas encouraged me to show his work, and then he in turn helped us locate a gallery in Japan to show Brother Thomas's work. By that time, he was already designated living national treasure. Took 3 days of his life to take me to every gallery that represented his work in order to help us have an exhibit of Thomas's. Then we did have the exhibit. We brought a group of people from the United States to that moment to celebrate it. And Mr. Shimaoka was the first to buy a piece of Thomas's from that exhibition. An enormously generous, kind, and talented human being whose legacy for me remains very, very present. And Caroline, I'd like you, if you want to speak about this piece and his use of the rope patterning.
So the Shimaoka is known for that rope inlay. All those or not horizontal, but those marks across the center surface of the pot. He would have rolled a piece of rope across the top, and then he used glazes later, wiping some away to give that depth. And what it does for the pot, I mean, it completely changes it. Not only has he added motion to spin the pot to complement its thrown nature, and also giving that depth of the blue, which actually I believe would have been from Germany, which he would have probably learned from Soji Hamada, who was his sensei. But the life that rope gives in there, giving it just this sense of motion and movement that it wouldn't have had otherwise, is just, I mean, it's just the joy he puts in all of his pottery, not only to look at, but to hold as well. They're very wonderful pots that are friendly.
This form, incidentally, is inspired by a Korean honey pot that had panels around the side of it. And we actually, when I was in Korea, bought an old honey pot that we have in the gallery. And then you realize that then Shimaoka takes that form and then makes it personal by the use of the rope. The other thing is that his father was, in fact, a rope maker. He made the cord that went around the obi that somebody wore when they wore a kimono. And they were all different textures. So when you look at his work, and this exhibition particularly focuses on probably the 30 or 40 pieces of his work in our collection, you'll see both this line that we have here, you'll see herringbone patterns, all sorts of textures that came from the little pieces of rope that he inherited from his father. Moving on to the work of Pat Keck. And Sam, I know she admires your work.
I admire. I think it's extraordinary. It's formally. It catches my eye, first of all, formally. It is a kind of an elongated pyramid, and then it has two white pyramids, and then it has one white pyramid with a red door, and then it has a reversed pyramid, which is the shirt of the man. And then it has in some way the crown of it, which is the face. And there is something for me always incredibly haunting by the presence, the human presence, the perfection of the shoes, and at the same time this amazing face, I would say, almost somebody who is ready to hypnotize you, like a kind of a magician. And the magician is going to perform something. He will knock on it, and the door will open, and then things will happen. The whole thing as one unit. It is not a base that holds on it something. It is a work of sculpture that from the bottom to the very top, that ends with this disheveled hair, is for me a perfection in itself.
I love it. Will you look at the next slide, please? Because there's a button on the right of the figure, which you push and the door opens. and there's a figure standing inside, and it's a fairly decorative little chamber. The door closes, then there's a button on the left-hand side under the shoe, which you push and you open it, and the man has disappeared inside.
So being and not being, yeah. To be or not to be, that is the question.
Well, for her, he's called the tricky man. I must say that of all the pieces in the gallery, when people visit, they're mesmerized by this. They can be 90 years old and they can be 9 years old. Everyone wants, where'd he go? And since I'm much happier not knowing, I don't know either, but it certainly is a tricky man. But it's true of all of her work, that her work is filled with a sense of mystery, and if for some people, of both a sinister mystery and nod. There's also a sense of ultimate joy and discovery as she is able to become the magician who creates all of these pieces, from cutting down the tree to basically fashioning the pieces. Her work is an invitation to simply be engaged with the magic of the world itself, as done by Pat Keck. The next piece, please. Amar, I'd love for you to talk a bit about this. This is the one of, I think, about 8 or 9, maybe 10 pieces that Ali's now has done using purses. And we've worked with Ali for, I think, 44 or 45 years, from the moment she graduated from museum school and came with very small little, what I had then called cloth paintings. And we took her work immediately, and all 7 of her first pieces were acquired by members of the gallery staff. And she continues to create a sense of absolute delight and discovery and of the unexpected. Mara, sorry.
Mara had to go, Bernie.
Oh,
I
okay.
think she had a tight schedule. I think she had to.
Oh, all right. Then Mara won't speak. Then Rusty, you get a chance. Huh?
I've always loved Ali's work, and just to make a comparison with Pat Keck work looks sort of sinister and
Right,
a little bit evil kind of, and then when you engage it, it brings out great joy. It's like the joy of a magician in front of children. Ali's work looks beautiful. I mean, it's flowers, it's fruit, it's still lifes. And then when you engage it, you realize there's a bit more to this than flowers and funny happiness. And what she's able to do with cloth, I mean, these are cloth paintings, some painting, but mostly cloth and layering to create images that you can identify with, flowers or purses or coats or waterfalls or things that you immediately see them, and they're very colorful and quite beautiful. But then the closer you look, the more you say, gosh, you know, this is a little bit, there's something more to this. And so I just enjoy that. Every time there's a new piece that comes in, there's the immediacy, and then there's that deeper sort of feeling, emotion that comes from spending time in front of her work.
Sam, your thoughts? You've seen Ali's work.
It's a beautifully created work, crafted. But I must say, for me, it expresses something which is, I don't know, between nostalgia and loss.
Yeah, sadness.
It looks to me like what happened after a terrible flood, and people came and started to search for things that have remained of a former existence, of a beautiful tapestry here that must have been on some furniture, or some flowers that somebody, and artificial flowers, not real flowers that a lady wore on her robe, and some strange petals in pink that one doesn't know where they come from. There is also a stone on the left side that makes you think that the whole thing is on the ground, a ground that survived a catastrophe and somehow speaks, I don't know, almost in the style of a Chekhov story of of a certain moment of some existence that happened before.
It's absolutely beautiful. And it's interesting, Sam, because as often with Ali, she could never put into words what she has created. And so you've been very helpful to me too, in realizing that her works are always about more than what you're looking at.
Yeah.
There's a sense of the fragility of the human condition, and yet they're beautifully, beautifully fabricated, right word, and she uses fabric.
Yeah.
And she does it with enormous simplicity, but the underlying emotion is one of complexity, and I think, as you've correctly identified, of sometimes of loss. Yeah. And there's this wonderful sort of push me, pull you in all the works that, and of all the artists, there's no way to know what the next piece will look like. That she herself is on this kind of personal, very quiet journey, and these are reflections of where she is, both emotionally and spiritually. It's been an absolute joy just to be alongside for that journey. And let's look at the last piece, if we can. And Caroline, if you'd begin talking about this, I would call it monumental, even though it's not a huge piece, of Hideaki Miyamoto's.
Yeah, Hide's work, I always say this, I didn't know of his work coming into the gallery, and it was the one that, honestly, besides seeing people like Randy Johnston and Hamada and Tatsuzo, who I had only seen in books, but Hide's took me aback. He's just a master of glaze, and it's only his. He doesn't share his secrets, which I appreciate, because he works so very hard to find these colors, these textures. It's not all one texture, and these shapes as well. It's porcelain, and this is not only a throne piece. An octagon, each side coming and joining together. I mean, just the feat of that, I know, is a process. And these pieces are they're just gorgeous. And he very much thinks of them as sculpture, not because you wouldn't use this, right? It has an element of, it is a jar, but it's not, you're not going to put your sugar for your tea in this. It is sculptural. And I love that bridge of, maybe the pictorial to, the pot that's on your table. This sits there, but this piece is just, his work is spectacular. And it's something I always encourage people to touch as well, because they do have unique textures to them.
I would just add something that, to me, looking at it as a two-dimensional image on the screen of my computer, I see that every side of it, every one of these 8 panels, seems to me a kind of homage to Rothko. To a Rothko that has survived a global warming, where every one of his shapes starts to melt. It speaks volumes. It speaks volumes. It projects us into a future. And unfortunately, humanity won't be there because of global warming to admire the Rothkos that melt. But this piece is speaking about them.
Absolutely wonderful insight. I think Hide will be pleased to know that.
No, he did not. Maybe he never heard of Rothko.
No, it's a difficult time pronouncing ours, but otherwise we're fine. Rusty?
I reiterate what Carolyn said. He's a master of glazes. This is one particular sort of melding, but many of his pieces use Herbert glaze, which is a wonderful glaze to touch and to see. And then he mixes it beautifully. Sometimes it just stops and another glaze starts. Sometimes he melds them together. He uses very tiny little crystalline glazes so that you get these little tiny pops that we saw much bigger in Hung Wei's work. But he works with all of those, as well as an amazing group of shapes. So this looks like it might be usable. Many of his pieces clearly are not usable. They're meant to be sculptural, decorative in a way. But just to see the range of his glazes is truly unique.
It has been an interesting journey with him, because when we first started, Brother Thomas was concerned about his health in terms of the gases created by the fumes. And in addition, liked the work, so he wrote the first essay for the first catalog we did of Hide's work. Over the years, Hide's glaze vocabulary has obviously increased and multiplied in beautiful ways. And not long ago, he said to me, Bernie, I'm surprised because when I first came here, I was trying to learn and copy other people's glazes. Now they're trying to copy mine. So he certainly has evolved and grown, and glazes have moved parallel with him as he has also experimented with new forms. This octagonal form is spectacular. So let me thank everyone for joining with us, to apologize once again for going longer than we should, and also to just end with a quote from Brother Thomas that I think summarizes much of what Sue and I both feel about fine choices. It is right to be acknowledged and gracious to acknowledge. No one does anything alone. And I would argue very strongly that the experience of the gallery is a tribute to the artists, to the patrons, to the staff that we've worked together with over these 57 years. So let me end by saying thank you.
Thank you.